If I had it to do all over again with deadlifts and learning how to pull, I would have started with sumos, and I also would have trained very regularly the deficit sumos, which is standing on something to make you taller. That would have not only limited the amount of weight that I could lift, but down the road it would have increased my mobility and hip flexibility in order for me to be a great deadlifter in the future. So in this video, we're going to go over some deadlifts. We're going to go over some deadlift technique, and we're going to go over some ideals that you should have when learning and building up your deadlift. The first thing we need to talk about, which is kind of one of my big things, is you need to learn how to sumo deadlift first. And how I learned this was that if you look at the data, one of the primary reasons that people have lower back problems is because of lack of hip mobility. The sumo deadlift is a great tool in order to develop hip mobility and make sure that the hamstrings, the glutes, and the quadriceps grow at a more equal rate. Unlike the conventional deadlift, which is a little bit more legs and back. So people tend to gravitate towards the conventional deadlift because most people have a little more legs and back than they do glute and hamstring activation. This is why you see in conventional deadlifting, people start here. It's more natural feeling, and it plays to people's strengths more than their weaknesses. And that's the big problem. The deadlift always needs to be trying to attack weaknesses. If I had it to do all over again, I would have learned sumo deadlifts first, and I would have gotten more flexible at sumo deadlifting by training with deficits, which would limit my amount of weight that I could lift, but increase my flexibility, mobility, and enhance my positioning in the deadlift of itself. So one of the big things you see wrong on the internet and going into a lot of gyms is that people have the wrong footwear on to deadlift. The first thing you need is a shoe that is close to the ground as possible and has zero heel. The foot should be a natural position. One of the best shoes for that is a Chuck Taylor. Reebok makes a couple of shoes like it as well, but most of the clients and people that I train, you can find a Chuck Taylor at any store. So don't mess up and have the wrong kind of shoes on when you deadlift. You don't want a running shoe. You don't want a cross trainer, you want something as flat as possible. All right, the first big thing you want to do when you're deadlifting is you want to make sure that your head is in the proper position. So when Paige goes down to grab the bar, what she's going to do is she's going to have to look at the bar to get her hands right. Okay, so once she gets her hands set and gets them where she likes them, she's going to have her head, she's going to have her eyes look at least neutral, if not slightly up. Right there. So do not start with your head down like this. A lot of people do that and it's wrong. You actually want to pick it up, head up, chest up. And that's the trick, is that the sternum needs to be high. Most people, if you have your head up high, your sternum's going to be high. The next step is the shoulders. So when Paige goes up to grab to the bar, the first thing she's going to do after she gets her head locked is she's going to pinch her shoulder blades about as hard as she can, like she's flexing her lats. That is going to force her body to pull the bar into her legs and make sure that the bar comes up her legs as it comes out and not away. The next step is when she goes down to grab the bar, she's got her head right, she's got her lats right. The next thing she's going to do is pull her hips down. So she's actually tugging on the bar and pulling her hips down about as far as she can. Now she's in proper position to deadlift. Now that we have the head, the shoulders, and the hips set and locked, the last and final thing that we need to really focus on is that most of the foot pressure is on the heel, on the back part of the foot. That is going to force all the muscles to work correctly and make sure that her knees don't straighten out before her hips are helping. This is a lot of reason why you see guys and girls get to their knees and then they can't move the bar anymore. They didn't start with the hips first. Good. Now as you see her lifting it down, when she comes back up, you're going to see her hips and her knees work at one integral unit. The bar is dragging up her legs, her knees and her hips are working equally. That is the perfect conventional deadlift. Good. But the reason that you don't want to start at conventional is because conventional for most people is going to be mostly leg extensors and low back, because that's what we use every day for everything. So what you want to do is learn how to pull sumo, and we're going to show that next. Boom. All right, good.
Cool.
So my favorite position to pull for training and to teach the normal person is the sumo. The sumo deadlift has massive transfer to the conventional. When Ed Cohen pulled 901 Sumo at 220, he pulled 881 conventional. They're very similar if you're trained properly. But the real point of it is, and most of us will never get to those numbers, is that the Sumo deadlift fixes hip mobility, by meaning that when you pull Sumo quite regularly, then what ends up happening is that your hamstrings, your glutes, lower back, and everything grows at a more even rate. When you pull conventional, you're going to tend to start with what all your strengths are, which is quads and low back, which creates a lot of injury. So the first thing you want to do for a good rule of thumb is most people are going to have their shins lined up with the circles that are etched into the bar, okay? For some people, it's going to be a little bit wider. For other people, it's going to be a little bit narrower based on your height, leg length, and most importantly, mobility. But a general rule of thumb is that your shin is going to be lined up with the circle. The next thing that you do that a lot of people screw up is you actually want to squat down to the bar and mimic how you want to pick it up. So don't just lean over, do it wrong. Don't just lean over to pick it up like he just did right here. He's going to stand back up and he's going to squat to the bar. That's going to load his hips properly. Okay. Now the next thing he's going to do is he's going to keep his upper back as tight as he can, and he's going to push on the outside of his feet and through his heels. That's the one thing that they both mimic, the conventional and the Sumo, is that most of the pressure needs to be on your heels. So he's going to lift the weight, and he's going to use his legs and his hips at the same rate. He's going to set it back down, and he's going to show you what happens when most people go heavy, where they straighten their legs first, and they shoot their ass up into the ceiling. So now what he's going to do is, when he lifts it, he's going to shoot his ass up first, and then he's going to finish it. That creates a lot of back pressure and a lot of problems. The reason that he does that is because his quadriceps are stronger than his glutes. So when the weights get heavy, the body's going to try to go to whatever it has and ignore whatever it doesn't have. So the real technique of how you fix these lifts is based on what muscle groups need potentiated and warmed up, and then which muscle groups need slammed into the ground with the proper accessory work. So case in point being is that lots of deadlifting will sometimes not fix deadlift technique at all. What fixes deadlift technique is having no muscle weaknesses in any muscle groups, creating balance between concentric and eccentric, front and back. So what happens is when we start lifting, our anterior bodies are stronger than our posterior bodies. And until those two mesh at a 1-to-1 ratio, we're going to always have a technical problem no matter how much we practice. So what he's going to do is when he goes down to grab the bar, he's going to grab it too close. You see this a lot, especially with guys that have poor hip mobility. That is going to already cause his back to be rounded. So now he's going to take his hands out where they should be, which is straight up and down. Now his body is in perfect mechanical position. He's going to have a lot better chance of pulling weight way safer. The next thing we're going to show is that when you get down to the deadlift and you get everything locked in, the biggest portion of learning how to deadlift correctly is having a strong enough upper back that the bar doesn't lean over and into him. So what you have to do is have a strong enough back that your chest stays up high. That is very, very difficult to build and takes a long time. So what happens is the legs are always stronger than the upper back at first, and until they're equalized, the deadlift technique will be poor. So what he's going to do is he's going to try to pull his chest up as high as he can, and he's going to lift from there. Now you see it almost looks like a squat with something in his hands versus something picked up off the ground. The next big thing that you're going to have to focus on and work with is that the hips and the knees have to work in one integral unit. If they work separate, what's going to end up happening is he would pull that bar to his knees and not be able to lock it out. So he would come here, he would lock his knees, he'd get to about there, he's not going to be able to lock it out. That's what's going to happen with heavy weights. He's going to set it back down, he's going to do it right, he's going to push out to come up, and he's going to push his hips forward, and now everything works in one integral unit. So the deadlift is almost a magic trick, so to speak, in the fact that he's not trying to lift the bar, he's trying to push his hips forward into the bar, causing the weight to come off the ground. So he's pushing his feet in the ground and he's pushing his hips forward, and that raises the bar. So it's almost an optical illusion, so to speak. But if you're trying to lift the weight off the ground, the upper back will absorb it and cause it to round. So these are the tricks for the deadlift. Obviously you want to learn how to pull Sumo first and perfect it, so it creates balance between the hamstring, glute, and quadricep. And just remember that it takes patience to have a strong enough upper back to show what the legs are capable of actually lifting.